All right, so what is required to be an election inspector is a qualified elector, which means someone who could otherwise vote, that resides in the county in which the municipality that you're working in is located. So there have been times where election workers have maybe worked at a different polling place because of a need. I know in Strum there was Strum there was a school board referendum, so maybe we had to share some workers for that event. And a qualified elector is a U.S. citizen, 18 years of age or older, has met the residency requirement, which is now just 10 days, and has to have the ability to read and write in English, have a good understanding overall. The political parties at times will appoint workers, and this isn't as, I don't know, maybe like controversial as it might seem. It's something that's commonly done. They have every right to do it. And they'll typically send a letter about this time of year to the clerks and ask that members of their party be appointed as election workers. As long as they meet these other requirements, that's fine. And they're subject to the same training requirements. The party might have additional requirements, like being a member of the party or being a member of an affiliated group with the party to want to appoint that person, but otherwise you may see that letter every once in a while. So this has been kind of a quiet year. I think we're all still recovering from all the elections last year and gearing up for the elections next year. There'll be 4 elections, February, April, August, and November. So there haven't been a lot of legislative or law changes. Voter ID remains in effect, so we'll review those requirements. The residency requirement was changed last year from 20 days, it's now 10 days. That was in effect last November, so just a reminder. Same with absentee ballots, there was a change. It used to be absentee voters had until the Friday after the election to turn ballots in. They now have to be turned into the clerk by the time the polls close on election day. Provisional ballots, which we'll talk about, the voter has until Friday to come with the necessary documentation. I'll cover that later. One of the things that we saw during the recount last year was a lot of absentee envelopes were not signed. They need to be witnessed, and there needs to be a witness address. And that came up several times across multiple counties. So just a reminder to look for that, and a reminder for clerks too. You might need to communicate that to people who've been voting absentee for a long time, and that's a rather new thing. Otherwise, I don't think there's anything new. Where did Paul go? Out there. Okay. So there's any other changes besides this?
Not yet.
Okay. And
that's what I got to say with the Wisconsin Election Commission.
Yeah, kind of quiet over there lately. And I am by no means the expert, so I will defer to Paul. I'll defer to you all too sometimes. So just my full disclosure on that. Okay, let's review now. Opening the polls. So pre-election preparation includes the clerk conducting a public test of the equipment. This has to be noticed. You'll see the notices in the paper about the day and time. And we receive cartridges from Command Central. I know that sounds like very official or maybe even Russian. It's not. They're from St. Cloud. They were just here and gave the clerks a training, and they were great. They send us the cartridges for those of you who have the touch screens. And then we need to make sure that, candidates' names are spelled right and everybody's on there. So that's a time to do that. Anyone can attend the public test. No one usually does. Although if you are interested as a worker in seeing how to set up the equipment, that would be fine. I've never had anyone attend. It's mostly me just cussing at the machine because they don't like to get cold, and our town hall is hardly ever used, and so it's like 45 degrees. Am I wrong, Sandy? It's 45 degrees in there, and the machine doesn't like to be cold. So it's like I gotta wait for an hour for it to warm up. So Another thing that came up too was, I think it was in November, Sandy? We got a ADA compliance visit from Wisconsin Elections where they had someone come around just to see, is the voting equipment set up properly so you can, get around it in a wheelchair? Is the, adaptive equipment like the headset, is that working? So just be mindful of that they were doing an audit and to make sure people can access the polls and are able to vote if they need to. One of the suggestions that came up, I think this was probably in Clark County, but maybe consider name tags for workers, just so, especially, we've got 4 elections coming up, maybe have a name tag sheet that people can wear name tags, just so people, I know our issue here is everybody knows everyone, right? Which we'll get into a photo ID. So let's review now a video on opening the polls.
Pre-election preparations and opening the polls. Your job as an election official is an important responsibility. Being familiar with election laws and procedures before Election Day will ensure that you will feel comfortable and confident serving at the polling place. There are a number of activities that you can and should do to increase your knowledge and help prepare you for an election. The polls may open at 7 a.m., but your job as an election inspector starts long before that.
This tutorial will provide tips to help you prepare the polling place and yourself for Election Day. You will learn what supplies are needed, the importance of strategic placement of polling place personnel and signage, and how to ensure accessibility at the polling place. The best way to begin your preparation...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you hear it okay in the back? Okay. And I don't know why it won't open larger. It usually gives me that setting, and it's not doing that. It's usually right here, so I don't know what's wrong this time.
I will get a tech support.
Well,
I think it sends you right to that Vimeo website, and they want you to open it up bigger there.
is that where it is?
Yeah.
Okay. No, before it, I mean, I did this last week, and there was a little option down here to make it bigger, so I don't know. Maybe the next...
is to attend a training session. All election inspectors, special registration deputies, and special voting deputies must attend election training within the 2 years of the election at which they serve. Chief inspectors must be initially certified by taking the 3-hour baseline chief inspector training class, either in person or via a live webinar with GAB staff. Read the Election Day manual. All chief inspectors receive a manual when they take the baseline class. You should make sure your manual is up to date by checking the version posted on the GAB website under Publications. Manuals can be downloaded for free or ordered for a small fee. The Election Day manual should always be at the polling place for reference. Your next step in the preparation process is to consult with the municipal clerk to determine how many election inspectors are needed. In high turnout elections, the clerk may decide to increase the number of election inspectors or assign a greeter or Election Day special registration deputy. The clerk should also designate an end-of-line officer to stand at the end of the line of people waiting to vote when the polls close at 8 p.m. Review contingency plans. Every municipality should have a contingency plan in place in the event of an emergency. By identifying and planning a response to some common emergency scenarios, such as a fire or power outage, the election inspectors will be better equipped to handle the uncertainty caused by emergency situations. Visit the polling place. Familiarize yourself with the location. Familiarize yourself with the ballot and voting equipment. You should be able to instruct a voter how to cast a ballot using the equipment. Finally, arrive early on Election Day. The polls open at 7 a.m., but you can use the additional time to ensure that everything is ready before the voters start to arrive. Before the first voter steps into the polling place, election inspectors should take the time to make sure the polling place is set up correctly and that they have all the necessary supplies. The way a polling place is set up affects how easy it will be for you to do your job and for voters to cast their ballots. The proper setup is one of the most important elements to ensure that Election Day will run as smoothly as possible. The polling place checklist lists all supplies, notices, and other materials and equipment that election inspectors should have at the polling place ready to go on Election Day. The polling place checklist advises the chief inspector to consult with the municipal clerk as to the layout of the polling place. Take a critical look at your polling place. Be familiar with the flow of traffic, and make sure it will be accessible to all voters, including those with disabilities. The checklist can be found in the Election Day Manual. When planning the layout of the polling place, keep in mind the following. Every polling place is required to have at least one voting booth per 200 voters who voted in the last general election. One voting booth must be at least 36 inches wide, with a writing surface between 28 and 34 inches high to meet accessibility standards. All voting booths are required to be placed together, including the accessible voting equipment. The accessible booth and voting equipment must be placed to ensure privacy and facing away from the view of the room or other voters. One ballot box is required for each type of ballot in the election for municipalities using paper ballots. There must be a supply of paper ballots available at the polling place in case a voter requires assistance. There is a challenge ballot for provisional voting, a malfunction of the electronic equipment, or simply a voter asks for one. At polling places with direct recording electronic equipment, a single ballot box for hand count paper ballots is required. This includes absentee ballots, assisted ballots, and challenge ballots. The American flag must be displayed on an outside pole or in the voting area during all hours the polls are open. Consider setting up a separate table solely for Election Day registration away from the area for pre-registered voters check-in to help regulate the flow of traffic. Traffic in the polling place can be improved by posting enter, exit, and voter registration signs. In addition, signs marking the accessible path should be prominently posted and easy to read from the parking lot. Additional directions that instruct voters that they must state their name and address and sign the poll book can make the process more efficient. A designated area should be set up at the polling place to allow election observers to observe all public aspects of the polling place. When feasible, the observer area should be not less than 6 feet and not more than 12 feet from the table at which voters are announcing their names and addresses and being issued voter numbers. Other necessary supplies and materials listed on the polling place checklist include Election Day forms, including ballots, poll list, ballot bags, and tally sheets. Please consider taking this checklist and marking the supplies, materials, and activities you have completed and notify the municipal clerk if anything is missing. The chief inspector should survey the polling place both inside and outside. Inside, is the voting area set up for an orderly flow of traffic? Are the paths wide enough for people with disabilities? Is there enough signage posted to help voters navigate the room and process? Are the election inspectors in place with the materials they need to do their job? Outside, is the entrance to the polling place clearly marked? If the accessible entrance is a different door, is there signage directing voters to it? Are the entrances free and clear of any obstacles, like snow and ice? Remember to verify that the numbered seal on the memory device in the electronic equipment is the same as the municipal clerk recorded on the inspector's statement after the public test. Make sure all ballot boxes are empty and locked, and that no more votes have been cast on the voting equipment. More information regarding ballot and equipment security can be found in the Voting Equipment Testing and Security presentation. We hope this presentation has demonstrated the importance of a well-prepared polling place. Coming to the polling place to vote is the only aspect of an election most people experience.
Okay. So last week when I used these, they opened up to full screen, but now I'm not seeing that option.
Provisional
So
voting.
I don't know. I've got just 2 more, but I don't know if downloading them will help. So can you still hear me okay? Any questions about opening the polls or comments or best practices? I want to draw your attention to not each table, but the first 5 tables here, and then starting right in the middle on this side, there are numbers at your table. Those of you with a number in front of you, you want to hold them up so people at your table and your row can see them. So this is row 5 here. This is row 4. This is 3. This is 2. This is 1. This is 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 in the back, okay? Those numbers correspond to the scenarios that are printed on the back side of your agenda. I'm going to ask you to read the scenario that corresponds with the number of the row that you're in. So the reason I'm telling you this now is we're about to go over the material that you will need to be able to effectively answer. There you go. Good job. How'd you do it? Oh. That helps, huh? Yes. So now it's just 2. Yeah. So we're going to go over the material that's pertinent to each of these scenarios. So I wanted to draw your attention to that now so you can take notes. And then as we transition to break later, I'll have you work. You can work in pairs, tables, rows, whatever. And then as we go on break, either before the break or during the break, or as we come back, then you can discuss the steps you'd want to take to address each situation or the situation that you were given, given the material. Does that make sense? Okay. Good deal. Okay, the next slide that I have is the inspector's statement. Now, I don't think this happens as much here, but the Clark County clerk wanted me to make a slide specific to this because she sometimes gets blank inspector statements back. The beauty of the inspector statement is if you put down things that happen, sometimes if you have a problem at the end of the night, you can go back and say, oh, that's right, when the paper jammed, or when this person came in, maybe that's when we got off a vote or voter number or something. So when in doubt, put it on the inspector statement. You don't get in trouble for putting things on there. So if there's a paper jam, if you assisted a voter in any way, or curbside voting needs to be on there. If there's more ballots than there are voters, make a note of that. These are really important when there's a recount, as we learned last December. And it's just helpful too at the end of the night. And be sure to initial the inspector's statement. And usually the clerk will ask inspectors to fill out paperwork. And Georgine, you want to sit in front?
I guess I don't have any choice.
Well,
Georgine.
maybe you're special and you get to be up front.
When you're writing those notes,
Sure.
you have to, or should you not, let's say the third bullet is assisted a voter.
Yep.
You want to put what number voters?
I would.
So you can have an idea of
I would.
or the time of day.
I would do both, actually. Well, it has a space on there for the time, but I would say assisted voter number 37, Anyone else want to add to that? Paul, anything you'd like to see on inspector statements? Everything? Okay.
Except when you go to the bathroom.
I don't know.
Some got almost that detail. More is better.
So first we're going to talk about photo ID and proof of residence. Now remember, proof of residence just proves where a voter lives. This is used to determine is that voter at the correct polling place for one, and able to register to vote there? Now, photo ID proves who that person is. There are documents that work for some and some that work for others. Sometimes that's the same document, but they don't necessarily have to be. Some have to have, a current address. Obviously, if you're registering to vote, it needs to be a current address. But photo IDs don't necessarily need to be current. So we're going to go through the ins and outs of that. Some documents can prove both. It would be a lot easier if everybody had a driver's license with their current address on it, right? That does not happen in reality, as we know. Even people we know that come to vote, things happen. So we're going to talk first about proof of residence, okay? Proving where someone lives. Are they supposed to be voting where they're voting at, right? So a proof of residence is acceptable if it has the current name and the current residential address, which is obvious if you think about it. You need to have your current address to be at the right spot. Some documents that we're going to talk about have expiration requirements, others do not. Now, the proof of residence is not used to confirm if the 10-day residency requirement is met. Actually, when the person goes to register to vote, they are attesting to a couple questions. One is, I'm a qualified elector. They're actually attesting that they're registering where to vote. Now, should you ask them and make sure they're in the right place? Absolutely. But it's otherwise, it's really kind of up to that voter to say, I am who I say I am. I live where I say I live. Unless an inspector challenges it, which is okay, and then you explore a little bit more.
What would be a cause to challenge?
If you know someone lives somewhere else, yeah. They recently moved. We're creatures of habit, and sometimes people think, I've always voted here. I'm going to vote here. We did have someone want to vote because they own land in that. That's not a law here in this country that if you own land, you get to vote in multiple places. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but we had someone who had moved to a house in town, right, Sandy? And they wanted to vote, and we knew, hey, you're in the city now, you need to vote there. And some people just don't know. I mean, our town hall is located right on this outskirts of the city. Some people don't even know that there's a difference. So it would be great if everybody had either a current and valid driver's license from Wisconsin or the Wisconsin ID card. These work, if they're current, they work for registering to vote and photo ID. Now it gets harder. Any other official identification card that's issued by a Wisconsin government body or unit, I've registered lots of people with their fishing license or hunting license. Concealed carry permit. Did they change that back or not, Paul?
The concealed carry?
Yeah. Okay. So for some reason I thought that came up last week, but so something issued by a Wisconsin governmental body that has that person's residential address on it, which if you've seen a fishing license or hunting license, they do.
What about an ATV?
An ATV license?
Hunter safety.
Where's it from? Is it from the DNR?
That would be for the youngsters.
Well, can you take hunter safety as an adult though? I've never seen a hunter safety. I mean, it'd have to be. Who even gives those trainings? I don't know. Isn't it like a rod and gun club?
They gotta be DNR certified.
Oh, then no, because it has to be a Wisconsin governmental unit. So DNR.
The card is issued by the DNR.
Is the card issued by the DNR?
And each contract is certified by the DNR.
Okay, so you think, I don't know if it's acceptable or not.
Sam thinks it is, and she's been reading that book.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that, for God's sake.
Well, actually, Sam's the one that processes the voter registration forms. So if there's a problem, Sam will call you, right, Sam?
Yes.
Back to that,
Yeah.
the concealed carry, what was your answer? Because what if that shows up?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I thought there had been a change, but if it's not registering with Paul, then no.
So they can come into the voting unit with a gun?
No, not with a gun, Dorjean. Jeez. No. I don't even cover that. Now we're going to have a whole new slide next time.
As long as I've been going.
Your concealed carry permit without your weapon are acceptable proofs of residence. We're trying to prove where somebody lives. We are just exercising our right to vote, not anything else that day. Oh my goodness, we're going to be on the news. So this is less common because an employer identification card, typically an employer would not put an employee's home address on an employee card. There might be exceptions if that employee is, works from home or is a contract worker, I guess, but this is less common. But if it's an employer ID card with the voter's home address, then it can be used, but not a business card, even if it has someone's photo on it. A real estate tax bill for the current year, or our tax bills are issued in December, I think. So preceding the election, 2017 would be fine next year. This is just to prove that that person lives there, not owns hunting land there or whatever, but where they live. A residential lease that's effective for the time in which includes the registration date. So typically people here in Wisconsin come and register to vote the day of the election, which is more pertinent to most people here. Usually the clerk handles voter registration at other times, but most people do, I would say, register on election day. So if the lease is, from now until June and the election's in February, then fine. It's just showing, are people where they're supposed to be to vote, right? Is this where you're supposed to be, or do you live somewhere else and you should be voting in another municipality? Now, a student ID card has to be accompanied with a fee receipt to show that that person's actually a student. And it has to be dated within the last 9 months to show that they were, recently a student. And I'll tell you that now tuition, college tuition bills tend to be online, and someone might show you the receipt on their phone. That is acceptable. That's just fine. But it has to show that they've, been recently a student.
So does one of them have their address on it, their home address?
It should. This doesn't apply to us because we don't have student housing located within Trumbull County. But in college towns, what a university would do is provide a housing list and say, these are students that live in student housing. They're eligible to vote here. This is probably the most common one, a utility statement.
Can we go back?
Yeah.
Does that mean they vote at that university?
They can. So students have the option to vote either where they're going to school at, or they can vote absentee at their home address. They have to be registered to vote. They can register to vote. But most common is a utility statement. So gas, electrical, telephone, cell phone, internet, has to be within 90 days of the day that they're registering. Name and current address. A bank statement of an account in which money can be deposited or taken out of. So a checking account or savings account, not a credit card. Not even a bank credit card like a Wells Fargo credit card or a Bank of America credit card. It has to be a checking or savings account. Money can be deposited or taken out. A paycheck, again, if that person's home address is on it, which is maybe not the most typical thing. And then a check issued by a unit of government, so unemployment check, Social Security, although I think all of that is electronically deposited now, isn't it? Do they provide a receipt or a slip? The money's just there? Oh my. Does it have your address on it? For unemployment, does it have your address? This one here, if a voter is homeless, a statement from either social services, human services here at the courthouse, or Western Dairyland would be a homeless service provider in Trumbull County that would identify that that person is homeless and voting, eligible to vote here. Paul, did you hand this out to them in recent years, this questionable proof of residence?
We may have, I don't.
Yeah, this is something that we issued this probably 2 years ago. Hopefully it's still at the polling place. Maybe we can make more, but this is the typical proofs of residence you might see. I covered a lot of them, so like a cell phone is fine. Mail from an official unit of government, like a city clerk's office, the court system, tuition bills are fine. But things that can't be used would be credit card statements, or even a mortgage loan statement is not acceptable. Great Lakes Higher Education is a student loan processing service. That doesn't work. Or even like home security, credit card, or W-2 cannot be used. So this kind of lays out a couple. Obviously, there are lots of other things that can't be used, but these are the typical ones that would come up.
How about a passport?
A passport does not include an address. Passport can be used for photo ID, which we're going to talk about next, but a passport doesn't include an address.
So that would work for them.
Not to register, nope. Okay, so we just talked about registering to vote, proving where a person lives, and these documents don't necessarily need to have a photo associated with them, right? We're just proving where someone lives. Now, photo ID is what people need to vote. So it has to show, typically, who that person is with a photo. It does not need to have a current address because we're just proving who someone is, who they say they are.
But it needs to be valid.
Possibly. We'll go through the ins and outs of it. These are acceptable photo IDs, and this was provided to the clerks when photo ID came out. It's a color printout. Hopefully it's sitting right there on the table. So a university or college student ID, as long as it accompanies enrollment verification, again, tuition bill, class schedule. Wisconsin state ID or driver's license. The Wisconsin driver's license or state ID receipts are paper copies, but they have photos printed on them, so those can be used. Well, people probably got those and they haven't got their license in the mail yet. Tribal ID, certificate of naturalization would have a picture. A passport, this is a passport here, has a picture. Veterans ID card can be used. and uniform services. I don't think, because when this came out, veterans ID cards could not be used, and then they changed it last year. Well, here, I have one.
They did send one with the veterans at a different time, because I have one at the office.
An updated one?
Yeah.
I thought I had, nope, I don't have an example.
To what you have there.
Is there one that has a VA insurance too?
VA insurance card, is that, I don't know the VA insurance, is there a photo on it?
Yep. There is.
I don't know, can the VA insurance one be used? Paul, Sam, anyone? That I don't know.
That's the last update of accessible heading.
I guess I don't know. Wisconsin DOT issued driver's license even if driving privileges have been revoked or suspended. Hopefully they didn't drive to the polls, but or well, lots of people drive to the polls without their driver's license, don't they? That's when people give you a hard time about asking for their photo ID, you say, well, how did you get here, right, Cheryl? Cheryl does that all the time. Wisconsin DOT issued ID card, military ID card, veterans card. We'll find out about the VA health insurance. Passport, card or book. The certificate of naturalization. Now this one does have a date requirement, which was not issued more than 2 years before the date of the election. So these don't expire, but I think I called the Elections Commission to get more information on this one a couple years ago. And what it is I think the assumption is that within 2 years, someone would get another form of documentation besides that, like either a photo ID card or a driver's license or something else. So they have 2 years from the date it was issued to get another form of photo ID to be used to vote. Here's the tribal ID. Doesn't matter about the expiration date of the tribal ID. Now these driver's license receipts have to be issued by the DOT within 45 days. I don't think it takes that long for them to come in the mail, does it? Well, I don't know. If you were moving around and needed to change your ID, maybe you've got other issues too, I guess. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Thanks for laughing, but I didn't mean that in a funny way. Just like, maybe people are in transition or whatever. And an ID card receipt issued by the DOT. Here's the student card. Now, it has to be from a Wisconsin accredited school. So UW-Madison, UW-Eau Claire, La Crosse, whatever. As far as I know, all the schools have updated their student ID cards to meet these requirements. So that needs to have a date when the card was issued, the signature of the student, an expiration date. Believe it or not, I have a student ID card. There's no expiration date on it. It was issued a long time ago. It was probably the first one to ever get like a student ID, like an electronic card. I could still use it at the movies or whatever if I resembled what I did in college, which I didn't. But so it has to be, expiration date no later than 2 years after the date it was issued, and then it has to be accompanied by a document that proves enrollment. So a tuition fee receipt, a course schedule, which a student most likely is going to show you on a phone, which is just fine. Now, photo IDs that can't be used to vote, the most common ones that people would ask, a state or federal government employee ID card. An out-of-state driver's license or ID card, I had this recently, has to be a Wisconsin ID card. An employment ID, a membership or organization ID, or a certificate of citizenship, which is different than the certification of naturalization. Now, this is obviously not a comprehensive list. You know, like a Sam's Club card cannot be used. Has a photo ID on it, might even have your address, can't be used. Not that Uncle Sam, right? So when a election inspector asks for the photo ID, they want to know, does that person reasonably resemble the picture on the photo ID card? Which is why I don't use my college one, right? Well, plus there's no dates, but so the elector's name needs to closely resemble. It doesn't need to be identical. And then if it has an expiration date, it has to meet the requirements listed that unfortunately get kind of confusing because they vary by document, right? Now, once in a great while, you'll see a case where someone does not need to provide a photo ID. There are ID cards issued that do not have photos on them, and this is actually what they closely resemble. It's like a blue square, and it says valid without photo. So if someone has a religious objection to being photographed, they would be issued this card. The citations or notice of intent to revoke the driver's license don't have a photo on them, but they have to be issued within 60 days. And again, maybe have this handy in case, these are rarities that happen, but if they do it, it is kind of nice to have something to refer to.
How would you know if that's person is looking at a photo?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think Paul, for the citation or notice of intent to revoke or suspend a driver's license, that suspension wouldn't have a photo on it, but would they have to have their driver's license with their photo that accompanied that citation?
I can answer that one. It's never popped up for us.
Yeah. Yeah, that I don't know. This the Wisconsin Elections Commission developed this one, so I'm not sure their intent behind that, but okay, so what do you do if something like this happens and you don't know? Call Paul. Write it down. Could you issue them a provisional ballot?
Well, according to this, yes. Or a regular ballot.
You still can't verify who they are.
You need to verify who they are. But with a provisional ballot, you don't have to verify who they are because they're not casting that ballot yet. We're going to talk about that next. That's why I tried to segue. But
Would this pertain to like the Amish?
yeah, this next one, the state-issued ID card without a photo would be the Amish, for sure. Has anyone seen these cards?
I'm wondering why someone would bring their sport.
Well, people bring all sorts of things to register that yeah. I don't know. Let's get clarification on this, and then maybe we can shoot an email to clerks.
Are we talking about the citation notice?
Yes.
Clarification? Okay.
A couple other examples. If someone doesn't need to provide a photo ID, I can't get back there. Confidential electors. Do you have a question?
Yeah, we're talking about the Amish.
Yep.
And what they use for things. They've just come in with their identification.
With their picture.
No.
No.
They don't get a picture.
Right. So this slide right here depends.
She was saying they vote.
Mm-hmm.
Mennonites do.
Yep. Yeah, they have the right to vote. Maybe not a frequent thing due to, you know, cultural expectations, but at times they can vote. At times they do vote. They are eligible to vote if they meet other requirements. So this is what this valid without photo card would look like. Is down in the corner there. So confidential electors are also exempt from the photo ID requirements. These are people who maybe are victims of domestic violence, and Paul will actually provide that information to the clerks if that applies to a registered voter within that municipality. Now, active military voters are not required to provide a photo ID if they're voting absentee, but if they come into the polling place, they have to present a photo ID like everyone else. And then indefinitely confined voters, if voting in person, they have to provide a photo ID. If voting absentee, there's a box that they can check that says I think it says I am indefinitely confined and do not have to provide photo. Isn't it about what that says on the absentee ballot? Okay. So, good process for photo ID and voting. Having the person state their name and address, have the voter remove the ID from the wallet. It's just good practice so you're not handling a wallet with money in it. Also, it's good once in a while to lodge that ID out of there, as I've learned. Like, if you're not used to pulling it out, it kind of gets stuck in there. And if you get anyone who gives you grief, you can remind them that they are required to follow the instructions of election workers. Federal law, it's posted on your polling place. You always have one that gets out of line, right? And it doesn't matter. When that person's gone, if that person passes away, someone else will take his or her place. Did I mention we're being videotaped today? You always have one, right?
What about
We have three, but yeah, one.
what
Yeah.
about the elderly person that says, I can't do it, you just do it for me? Like removing it out of the wallet, or they just slide it, and you can physically see it.
Yep.
Because it fits in the...
I would say you're not required to remove it. This is just a good suggestion. They're not required to remove it, but if you assist them much beyond that, I would make a note of it in the inspector's statement. Like if you have to assist them in the when they're filling out the ballot, then it needs to be indicated. But
A lot of times, because we've had that, but we try not to touch the wallet.
Right.
We have them hold it.
yeah, I think that's okay. Now, what's the thing that we have here when people come in and you ask for their photo ID? You know me. Yep. You're my mom. Yeah.
What about the person that's coming with the spouse
Mhm.
and they have some type form of mental disability, Alzheimer's, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
And they're supposed to state their name.
That was gonna be my question, thank you.
Is the law that they have to state their name and address? It is, isn't it?
The address, they don't know the address.
Yeah.
Is it okay? Because like here we do know where they live.
Right.
And if the spouse is with them, they say it for them. Is that?
What do you think, Paul?
I would think the spouse could have that.
Okay.
But if a person's got Alzheimer's, they don't know what's going on anyway. Who are they voting for?
So, if you refer back to the requirements, people do have to, meet basic requirements of, being a qualified elector, which I would assume that's one of them. I don't know. I don't do indefinitely confined voting. What's the official answer on that?
Well, it's commented back here that somebody maybe had a stroke, but they're in their right mind, I would say.
If they're registered to vote and otherwise? Yeah.
Even if they have Alzheimer's, if they're not with it, I did nursing home voting. Some of them don't even have a clue that an election is going on. But unless a physician says they are incapable of voting,
Okay.
you have to let them vote.
Okay.
there's nothing we can do about it.
And I would make a note about assisting a voter, you know, in that case. That happens.
Yes, put it in the statement.
Yeah. So remember, I like the comment that was made up here. You know, people who are otherwise eligible to vote have the right to vote. And so unless it's challenged and within that challenge, you know, that remains, you kind of have to err on the side of letting people cast a vote. Now, do you have to make sure they're in the right polling place? Absolutely. Do people need to provide photo ID? Yes. So you couldn't have somebody come in with a spouse and just one spouse show their photo ID. I mean, each elector has to. So keep to the basics. Now let's talk about those times when people are not able to meet the photo ID requirements. They don't have the proper photo ID with them. Provisional ballots were something that I don't think cared too much about in the past, but now with the emergence of photo ID requirements, provisional ballots are a little more prevalent. Now, what a provisional ballot is if you have someone who is otherwise a registered voter come in and cannot provide the proper photo ID, that person does have the option to fill out a provisional ballot at that time and return to the polling place later that day if they want that ballot cast that night and be counted that night. They actually have until Friday after the election to return their proper documentation to the clerk. However, as we know in practice, it's a lot easier if they just run home and get something, right? So what do we do to work around this? Urge them. Yeah.
Could you restate what you said? You said they got to bring it in by 8 o'clock that night.
Yep. If they want it counted that night.
You said something about they have until Friday?
Yep. They actually have until Friday following the election to bring that documentation to the clerk.
But if the vote's already been cast and we've counted it, and they don't bring it in, or we don't count it?
That's why I give you those blue envelopes that you put the ballot in. It stays in that until they prove. If by Friday they haven't come back, that envelope will never be opened, never be counted.
So they have that option. It's extra work, right, clerks? So that's why we urge them, hey, just run home and get it. Now, the beauty of where we are is that there's typically not long lines, right? So even if someone's waited, they're not going to have to come back and wait in line for an hour or something. We also all live relatively close to a poll. I mean, that's why our polling places are where they are. Close for us, right? Midwestern close. So urging people, hey, you need this, run home and get it. And even urging them to, if you issue them a provisional ballot, which is within their right, to say if you come back by the time the polls close at 8, then we can count your ballot. Because most people want that ballot counted that night. Otherwise, why would they take the time to come into the polling place and try to vote if they didn't want their ballot cast? So they do have until Friday. But then the clerk has to call the canvassers together, and we got to look at, have them bring it back. It's just so much easier. But if they want a provisional ballot, this is what we're going to do. We're going to watch a video.
Provisional voting.
All election inspectors should be aware of the provisional voting process. This presentation will provide you with detailed instructions on when a provisional ballot may be issued and the process election inspectors must follow to document the provisional voting process. Currently, there are only 3 situations in which a provisional ballot may be issued. 1, when a first-time voter registered by mail during open registration and did not include proof of residence. This voter will on the poll list with POR required notation. If the voter does not have acceptable proof of residence, he or she may vote a provisional ballot. If this voter voted an absentee ballot, the absentee ballot will be treated as provisional if no proof of residence is included with the ballot. 2. When a voter who registers on Election Day has been issued a Wisconsin driver license or state ID card and is unwilling or unable to provide the number. Any voter with a Wisconsin driver license or state ID card may not use the last 4 digits of his or her Social Security number. 3. If a voter is unable or unwilling to present an acceptable form of proof of identification. Voters are required to show an acceptable form of proof of identification to receive and vote a ballot at the polls on Election Day. There are also a number of steps to documenting the provisional voting process. The voter should complete and sign the provisional ballot certificate, GAB 123, in the presence of at least one election inspector. The election inspector also signs the GAB 123 and indicates which piece or pieces of information the voter is missing. The voter is issued a provisional ballot number, PD1, PD2, and so on. This identifying number is recorded on the back of the ballot issued to the voter, the inspector's statement, poll list or supplemental poll list, and all other forms associated with provisional voting, GAB 123, GAB 123R, and the provisional voting information sheet given to the voter. A provisional voter should be given the provisional voting information sheet. This sheet must identify how or where the elector is to contact the municipal clerk or deputy clerk to provide the missing information. The voted ballot is placed in the GAB 123 envelope, sealed and kept with all other provisional ballots cast on Election Day in the Inspector's Certificate for Provisional Ballots envelope, the GAB 108. When the polling place closes, the Inspector's Certificate of Provisional Ballots envelope must be secured in a separate ballot bag with a tamper-evident seal. The serial number should be recorded on the signed ballot container certificate attached to the bag and on the inspector's statement. The bag should be marked provisional ballots. The election inspector should fill out the GAB 123R and return it to the clerk. A provisional voter can return to their polling place on Election Day to provide the missing documentation. If the provisional voter returns to the polling place before 8 p.m. on Election Day with the missing documentation, the election inspector should review the information to determine if it is acceptable. If it is, the elector signs the poll list, and the inspector's note on the inspector's statement that the elector provided the required documentation. If the elector chooses to spoil the provisional ballot certificate envelope, GAB 123, is removed from the inspector's certificate of provisional ballots envelope, the GAB 108, and given to the elector. The elector should remove the provisional ballot and spoil it by making a small tear in the ballot. The election inspector should document the incident on the inspector's statement, the GAB 104. The elector signs the poll list, and a sequential voter number is recorded on the poll list and noted on the provisional reporting form, GAB 123R, by marking on poll list in the column labeled voter number issued. The elector is given a new ballot. If the provisional voter does not return to the polls on Election Day, he or she has until 4 p.m. the Friday following the election to supply the municipal clerk with the required documentation. This process is covered in detail in your manual and several training webinars. We hope this webinar has provided you with the instruction you need to properly issue and document a provisional ballot at the polls on Election Day. Remember, currently there are only 3 situations where a provisional ballot may be issued in Wisconsin. We recommend election.
So this isn't a new process. It's just that we maybe didn't pay, it just wasn't maybe as relevant or as often that we did this until voter ID came into effect. So, again, encourage them to go and get something, although they do have the right to cast a provisional ballot. Those of you who have that as a situation, we'll talk about that more after we come back. And remember too that the most likely scenario is going to be that somebody has forgotten their photo ID or didn't know that they needed it. Again, this person has to be registered. This is not if someone's in the wrong polling place or doesn't have the documentation to register to vote. This is for already registered voters. I'm pretty sure the first time Wisconsin voters by mail before 2014, we've pretty much worked through all of those, haven't we, in the last couple of years? I mean, I think anyone that applies to, it's probably been corrected. So they're not given when people are at the wrong polling location, not given if somebody needs to register to vote. It has to be in by the Friday following the election. Now, absentee ballots, it's good to process these when there's a lull in the action during the day. Best not to wait till the end of the day to process absentee ballots. You know, we get tired after a long day too, so it's good to do these when we're relatively fresh. Now, absentee ballots do need to be in by the close of the polls on election day. This is a change. It used to be the Friday after, and the people that made these changes have not been municipal clerks. Because when you think about it, how would I know what's in my mailbox if I'm tied to the polling place all day? So last November, well, and then I guess in April too, my husband had to do the absentee ballot check in the mailbox. Like, I mean, that ballot has every right to be counted, but my mail doesn't come to our polling place because no one's ever there. It comes to my home address. So I'm like, you need to check for absentee ballots. Luckily, I only send out a handful, so it's really easy to keep track of. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. So we'll talk a little bit more about absentee ballots, I think, when we talk about rules or things that came up in the recount. So now we're going to talk about closing the polls. Now, these videos were shown in the last 2 trainings, so hopefully these are just refreshers. What I'm going to do with this closing the polls video is we're going to watch the first part of it and talk about reconciling the poll lists. And I'm going to pause it halfway through. We'll talk about reconciling poll lists, and then we'll watch the second half of it, which is counting write-ins. It gets a little confusing. And so we'll try to break it up and talk about it a little bit and kind of talk about why it's confusing. So we got another video. Everything okay on the volume with the videos? Okay. And this is our last video, for those of you who don't like them as much.
Closing the polls. Election inspectors are responsible for maintaining an environment at the polling place that allows voters to cast their ballots without disruption, from the opening of the polls at 7 a.m. to the closing of the polls at 8 p.m. Election inspectors must also ensure that the voting process is transparent and open to the public.
This presentation will outline the general procedures election inspectors should use to close the polling place at the end of Election Day. We will also review poll list reconciliation best practices and counting write-in votes in vote for more than one situations. On Election Day, all polling places in the state of Wisconsin close at 8 p.m. The only exception is when a court orders a polling place to remain open. The voters in line at the time the polls close must be permitted to vote. At 8 p.m., to officially close the polling place, the chief inspector announces, "The polls are now closed." The designated end-of-line officer stands behind the last voter in line at 8 p.m. to clearly identify who is entitled to vote. The end-of-line officer does not need to be an election official. It could be an employee of the municipal clerk's office, a building maintenance person, or even a police officer. The doors to the polling place must remain unlocked even after the polls are closed. The end-of-the-night activities are open to the public. Candidates and the media are also welcome to watch and record these activities.
The prohibition of video and still cameras does not apply after the polls close unless it is disruptive or interferes with the post-election activities of the inspectors. Observers are still required to follow all other provisions of the observer rule during the closing process. Once all the voters have cast their ballots, election inspectors start the process of reconciling poll lists, counting ballots, and completing required forms. These activities will be less taxing if duties are rotated among the election inspectors. Reconciling the poll list will likely be much easier if the inspectors working the poll list communicate with each other throughout the day. They should periodically compare voter numbers and other notations to ensure the lists contain identical data. We recommend that you compare voter numbers throughout the day. You can compare every third number, first and last number on each page, or some other type of random sampling. You can also compare voter numbers at specific points in time and check the voting equipment display to see if it matches. List the time and voter number on the inspector's statement. That way, if you discover a problem later, you can zero in on that point at which the problem may have occurred. When the poll lists are reconciled, the last voter number on both lists should match and should be circled in red. The chief inspector and the election inspectors who maintain the poll list then sign the certificate page of the poll list. Election inspectors should enter the total number of voters, the number of absentee voters, and the number of provisional voters in the spaces provided on the inspector's statement, GAB 104. Verify that the tamper evidence seal or seals on the voting equipment are in place and secure. Initial the post-election checkline on the inspector's statement and record the number of the tamper evidence seal on the ballot bag. The inspector's statement is then signed by the chief inspector and 2 other election inspectors. Do not seal the completed inspector's statement in the ballot bag. In communities with electronic voting equipment, close out the machine and print the results tape. In communities with hand count paper ballots, the votes must be recorded on tally sheets. All communities must use tally sheets to record write-in votes. All ballots should be reviewed for write-in votes. When tallying write-in votes, be aware that you may need to adjust the voting equipment results tape to subtract votes from ballot candidates when the equipment did not recognize that there was a write-in vote in addition to the vote for the ballot candidate. At the end of the night, the number of people listed as voting in the poll book should equal the number of ballots received and counted. If there are
we know how that feels.
It should be 100 ballots. Sometimes the number of voters and ballots don't line up, so the election inspectors must figure out why the numbers don't match. Scenario 1. You have more people recorded as voting than the number of ballots cast. For example, you have 101 voter numbers, but only 100 ballots. First, verify your ballot count. Check the auxiliary bin of your optical scan tabulator for any ballots a voter or election inspector may have accidentally placed in that slot instead of the actual tabulator. Also, check your absentee ballot certificate envelopes for any absentee ballots that may have been opened, recorded in the poll book, but not tabulated. Perhaps the election inspector was interrupted when processing the absentee ballot. Check the used absentee ballot certificate carrier envelope or container for any that may have been missed. If you are reasonably certain you have the correct number of ballots, check your voter numbers. Compare both poll books to verify the total number of voters. If the numbers still don't match, you will need to compare the voter numbers on each page of both poll books. If you have more voter numbers than the number of ballots, you likely skipped a voter number. If you can't identify why you have more voter numbers than ballots, you should document it as an incident on the inspector's statement. You don't necessarily need to take any additional action, but the clerk will need to take a look at it during the canvass process. Scenario 2. You have more ballots than voter numbers. This is the more serious situation. Though unlikely, it could mean that someone voted more than once. First, verify the ballot count. If the voting equipment experienced some type of problem during the election, that could be the culprit, particularly where a ballot jams. An election inspector may get an error message that a ballot jammed in the machine. Open up the machine and rerun the ballot. The machine may have counted it twice. It's important to document on the inspector statement any problems with voting equipment the election inspector experiences throughout the day. If you get to the end of the night and have more ballots than voter numbers, this could potentially explain the error. You may also want to check your defective original ballots envelope for any original ballots that were remade because they were defective. A defective ballot is not put through the machine and overridden. A defective ballot is remade, and the remade ballot is put through the voting equipment and the original ballot preserved. If both ballots were put through the machine, that would give you more ballots than voter numbers. If it's not a voting equipment or ballot-based error, go back to the poll books and check your voter numbers. Compare the poll books to each other to verify the total number of voters and verify the voter numbers on each page. The most common errors are when a voter number is used twice or when a person who voted is not issued a number. Check that any poll workers who voted on election day were issued voter numbers. Election inspectors sometimes forget to issue themselves a voter number when they vote. Counting write-in votes. 2013 Wisconsin Act 178 limits write-in votes that may be counted for a vote for one office.
We'll come back to that. So let's just review what they said about having more voter numbers than ballots. I will tell you, assisting with the recount process in 2 counties, this happens a lot. In fact, almost every municipality that I reviewed in Clark County, there was an issue with voter numbers. Sometimes they were caught and sometimes they were not. So, check, if a lot of times what would happen, absentee ballot didn't get where it needed to be. So maybe still in the envelope, some stuck in the bottom of the box. So check that. Definitely check voter numbers, and it's a good idea to be checking voter numbers throughout the day and most definitely at a shift change. It's a lot easier for people to correct mistakes if they were the ones that made it versus trying at the end of the night to recreate the whole day, right? Those of us, we've all been there, trying to count things at the end of the night over and over. So have a system. We're going to talk at the end of best practices, and I'll ask you to share some of the things that you do that kind of helps cut down on this. So check voter numbers and then check for loose ballots. Now, obviously, if there's more ballots than numbers, could signal something, more severe, although very unlikely. So check again, poll numbers, count the ballots again, would be probably your first step. Did you get off on voting? Does anyone have the machines that you feed the ballot through?
Yeah.
Village of Temple still has that?
Yeah. And City of Gainesville and the City of Arcadia.
Yeah, so maybe a little bit more room for error with those machines, feeding ballots through. What's nice about the touch screens that the rest of us have, or those of us that have it, doesn't let you necessarily overvote or cast things more often. So that's one good thing. So check numbers. Do you know what you do after you've checked all these things and you still have an extra ballot? You pull one out. A paper one, obviously, which is why I always tell people if you vote on the machine, it's on there, right? But paper one, it could be yours that gets pulled out.
So what happens if you didn't have any paper ones?
Then you wouldn't have, if you have a touch screen, then you wouldn't have any. Because the machine corrects for that error. So next we're going to talk about write-ins. This part is really confusing, even though we've seen it in the past. I'm sorry, other questions about that? We can stay on that. I'm just trying to get us to break. Questions?
Yeah, what did you mean by you pull one out?
Does anyone want to describe that? Since you're getting kind of chatty? Yeah.
If you have one too many ballots, you would just, in your paper ballots, you just reach in, grab one, and don't count it.
But is that fair for the voter?
Well,
No, well.
you have to equal out, so. And you don't know whose ballot it is, because they don't write their name.
Well, I know, but I mean, I myself, if I found that out, I'd be very upset that my vote wasn't counted in the election.
Then one way to assure your vote is counted is to vote on the machine.
Well, I know, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You know, I mean.
You run that risk when voting on a paper ballot.
But there's no identification on that.
There's, and it's totally random, so it doesn't matter if by candidate. I mean, it's just by chance. Yes.
One thing that we do, we have the poll votes for the books.
I'm sorry. There's a question.
One thing that we do, we have the 2 books.
Yep.
When the people come in, we assign them a number. Then we also have a separate sheet of paper that we write the person's name down.
Yep.
So
we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about that at the end. I'm glad you brought that up because when we do best practices, we'll talk about that process. Okay, so this next section on write-ins is really confusing. And we're going to watch it and talk about it. Honestly, it's probably still going to be confusing. So one of the things that Paul and Chris and I talked about is we're going to develop kind of a cheat sheet because sometimes offices, for certain offices, you're allowed to vote for more than one person. Obviously not president or governor, but local offices, for example, school board, town board, sometimes you can vote for, there's 2 or 3 options and you can vote for 2 or you can vote for 3. And that's where it gets a little confusing. So we're going to hash out, or at least try to hash out what those differences are. But I wanted to make note of that before we watch it. So you're kind of thinking of that. And remember, voter intent is the driving force. So what did people intend to do when voting? And they'll walk through a couple examples. So those of you who have, I think it's number 3, this is for you. Now, these scenarios on the back are open to interpretation. So if it doesn't say that there, make all the assumptions you want and bonus points for creativity, okay?
Closing the polls.
Uh-oh. No. You're going to want this one of all of them.
Closing the polls.
2013 Wisconsin Act 178 limits write-in votes that may be counted for a vote for one office. If there is at least one ballot candidate for a given office, only tally votes for registered write-in candidates. If there are no ballot candidates for a given office, tally all write-in votes. If there are any ballot candidates for a given office and one or more candidates pass away before the election, tally all write-in votes. Act 178 does not specifically address counting write-in votes in situations where more than one seat for a particular office may be up for election. For example, town board supervisor or village trustees. When counting write-in votes for offices with more than one seat, or vote for 2 or more, the following applies. If the number of ballot candidates for a given office is equal to or more than the number of seats to be filled, only tally votes for registered write-in candidates. If the number of ballot candidates for a given office is less than the number of seats to be filled, tally all write-in votes. If there are any ballot candidates for a given office and one or more candidates pass away before the election, tally all write-in votes. We recommend election inspectors ask themselves 4 questions when determining the viability of a write-in vote and in which situations votes for ballot candidates may be considered. 1. Can all write-in votes be counted, or just those for registered write-in candidates? 2. Is, or are, the write-in candidates registered? Regardless of whether the write-in votes can or can't be counted, are there enough write-in votes to fill the seats up for the election? 4. How many votes is the elector entitled to? Let's try some examples. Example 1. The voter has cast votes for the 2 ballot candidates and is also written in a name. 1. Can all write-in votes be counted, or just those for registered write-in candidates? There are 2 ballot candidates in this vote for 2 office, so only votes for registered write-in candidates may be counted. 2. Is the write-in candidate registered? Yes. Rusty Pipe is a registered write-in candidate, so a vote is tallied for Rusty. 3. Regardless of whether the write-in vote can or can't be counted, are there enough write-in votes to fill the seats up for the election? No. There is only 1 write-in vote for this 2-seat office, so ballot candidates may be considered. 4. How many votes is the elector entitled to? 2. 1 vote has been tallied for the write-in candidate, so the voter is entitled to 1 more vote. But which ballot candidate the voter intended to vote for cannot be determined, so no vote is counted for either ballot candidate. Result: only 1 vote is counted. Write-in Rusties. Example 2. The voter has cast votes for the 2 ballot candidates and is also written in 2 names. 1. Can all write-in votes be counted, or just those for registered write-in candidates? There are 2 ballot candidates in this vote for 3 office, so all write-in votes may be counted. 2. Are the write-in candidates registered? 1 is, 1 isn't, but all write-in votes may be counted. Votes are counted for both write-in candidates. 3. Regardless of whether the write-in votes can or can't be counted, are there enough write-in votes to fill the seats up for election? No. There are only 2 write-ins for this 3-seat office, so ballot candidates may be considered. 4. How many votes is the elector entitled to? 3. 2 votes have been tallied for the write-in candidates. The voter is entitled to 1 more vote, but which ballot candidate the voter intended to vote for cannot be determined, so no vote is counted for either ballot candidate. Result: only the 2 write-in votes are counted. Example 3. The voter has cast a vote for the ballot candidate and is also written in 2 names. 1. Can all write-in votes be counted, or just those for registered write-in candidates? There is 1 ballot candidate in this vote for 2 office, so all write-in votes may be counted. 2. Are the write-in candidates registered? 1 is, 1 isn't, but all write-in votes may be counted. Votes are counted for both write-in candidates. 3. Regardless of whether the write-in vote can or can't be counted, are there enough write-in votes to fill the seats up for the election? Yes, there are 2 write-ins for this 2-seat office, so ballot candidates may not be considered. 4. How many votes is the elector entitled to? 2. 2 votes have been tallied for the write-in candidate, so the voter is not entitled to any more votes. The vote for the ballot candidate does not count. Result: only the 2 write-in votes are counted. Note: the voting equipment has recorded a vote for the ballot candidate. The inspectors must subtract a vote for Ida Thought So on the tape. Additional examples of counting write-in votes are posted in the recent clerk communications and with the webinar materials posted as part of this presentation. Use the post-election checklist found in the Election Day Manual as a guide to the election materials that must be submitted to the municipal clerk on election night and the processes to be followed. We hope this webinar has provided you with some general instructions on what you need to do after the polls close on election day. We recommend that election inspectors and municipal clerks review all of the forms used in this process, in addition to
Okay, I have a tripping point in that it counts the write-ins, but one is a registered write-in, the other is not. How could the one that's not a registered write-in?
We're gonna talk about the question anyway. Can we wait?
Yeah.
Okay. So clear as mud, right? Okay. So it is my understanding that those of us who have the touch screens, this cannot happen to, right? The touch screen will not allow this to happen. Now, coming up this year, we are going to have offices where this is going to be a little more relevant than it maybe has been more recently. Because things like school board, county board, may allow for these sort of things. Now before, with offices like president and governor and other offices, the write-ins had to be registered. And the registered write-ins information is not posted. It is available, so if a voter asks, you have to provide that information. But otherwise, as an election inspector, you're not required to provide that. That information comes from Paul prior to the election to the clerks, and he'll say, these are the write-ins as they pertain to us. So that helps a lot. But given that, I think we're going to come up with a informational sheet for you to have at the polling place. And then I talked to Chris, and I haven't talked to Paul about this, but when we have offices in which this maybe is a little more relevant to, we might be able to point that out to clerks as we go along, especially next year. Like, you know, we've got the school board, people may vote for 2. This is what you do about write-ins, because it is confusing, right? So one of the things to keep in mind too is voter intent. So if somebody has taken the time to write names, although what names are they going to write down? Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, right? Yeah. Mickey Mouse could be governor at this point because Mickey Mouse gets a lot of votes. He is not registered. Maybe he should be. So, you know, they kind of ran through these 4 questions quick. So I think on this material that we'll flesh these out a little bit. You know, can they all be counted? So sometimes there's just, for an office, you're allowed 1 vote and there's 1 person on there. But at times there are registered write-ins, people that file their paperwork afterwards, which they're entitled to do. And then, are there enough seats? So sometimes you'll only see, you know, you can vote for 3, but there's only 2 people on the ballot, but there's 3 seats. And then how many votes is that voter entitled to? Some of for the judicial runoff in February, you can vote for 2 out of the 3, right?
No.
The primary, is it just 1?
Just 1.
Okay. But there's 3 on there?
I haven't seen a number yet.
Oh, I thought there was 3.
There has to be at least 3.
Okay.
Primary.
Okay. So we'll walk through that. Those of you who have situation 3 too, we'll talk a little bit more about these as they come up. And now, if you have tabulators that come and help, they can assist with counting, but any decisions about whether to count a write-in or pulling a ballot out, that is the duty of the election inspectors and the clerk to decide that. Tabulators don't get a vote or a say in that, nor do people who are observing. It is our job as election inspectors and clerks to make that decision. So this is kind of a repeat of the video, but if there's at least 1 ballot candidate for a given office, only tally votes for registered write-in candidates and candidates who filed a campaign registration prior to the election. That is provided by Paul, And if there are no ballot candidates, then all write-ins can be tallied. And if there are one or more ballot candidates for a given office and one or more die, then tally all write-ins, because, you know, that news has probably made its way out there and we didn't have time to redo the cartridges or the ballots is probably what happened. And then as far as reporting results, be sure to call in results on election night. Paul would like those materials as soon as possible, but no later than 4 p.m. And do not seal the spools in the ballot bag. Do not seal the inspector's report. Now remember take the black spool out, those of us who have the machines, and put the paper ones in there, because remember the paper receipt, those are ballots. That is actually a printed ballot, and so put that with the paper ballots and seal them in the ballot bag. You can remove the black spools. Paul has lots of black spools on hand.
It's better not to remove it.
It is better not to remove it?
Yes.
Oh yeah, don't remove them, because you'll give us more, you promise.
I will trade you full one for an empty one.
So Lenise at City of Independence has said to come to my rescue because I didn't have any spools, because Paul didn't have as many, but now he has lots. So leave them on there, because then it's easier at the recount.
Right.
Okay, sorry. The black spools for the paper. The touch screen. And shit, and no wonder it doesn't make sense, right? You have an edge? Okay.
Every municipality in the county
has an edge. Okay. So on the edge, there is a paper receipt. Looks like a receipt, and it's on a black spool. And you want to seal that paper receipt with all those ballots cast with the spool into the bag. But not the inspector's statement, right? Leave that out. Okay, so now we are going to work on the hands-on exercise so you know which one is yours. And we are going to take a break, so please work on that. And we'll come back in about 10 or 15 minutes. Ones. We have a table 1 in the middle here and right back there, correct? So number ones, I'll put it up on here, although you do have these on the back. So we have a voter who has moved, same county, just a different polling place, goes in to register and wants to vote on election day, has a driver's license but not an updated address, but has a utility bill. What steps do we want to take? Number ones. Okay, is she in the right place? Very important, right? Does she have the proper documentation? Okay. So she should be eligible to register to vote at that polling place if we verify it's correct and cast a ballot, right? This is a real story. This person was not allowed to vote. This person is my coworker. Why not? I don't know. The utility bill had her husband's name and her name and their current address. She was turned away.
Wrongfully, right?
Wrongfully. Yep. I told her I would give and it was not in this county, so nobody in this room is in trouble. Let me clarify. Different county.
What reason did they give her to turn her away?
Good question. I think they were hung up on her driver's license not having her updated address. Even though she brought additional documentation with her name on it and current address. They got hung up on the driver's license. I'm going to train them tomorrow. So. But what I want you to, group 1 answered it perfectly. Is she in the right place? Always good to check, right? Because sometimes we assume we know people and yeah, maybe they live, just on the edge or whatever. Number 2. This happens to all of us, right? Somebody comes in, enters the polling place to vote, doesn't have a photo ID, jokes a little, but then gets irritated. You know me. What steps should we take? 2s. We got row 2 here and back there. Encourage her to go home. I can't move much further.
But if she doesn't want to go home, you have to do a provisional ballot.
Okay. Yeah, see how she likes that, right? If she's already annoyed by this rule, she's probably not going to like the provisional ballot suggestion, but that is the proper procedure, right? So encourage her to have it. Do you let her vote? Yeah, you know her. Do you let her vote? No. Okay. So this is, I mean, we've all encountered this. My chief inspector, Cheryl, turned down her son-in-law. He didn't ever. She did. Yeah. No. He wasn't mad. He wasn't mad, yeah. But she did her job. So, encourage them, urge them, run home and get it. Provisional ballot is also an option, right? Perfect. Number 3 is a little more nebulous. Bonus points for creativity. We've also all seen this, right? People get a little squirrely, especially in the winter when there aren't a lot of people on the ballot and they've come in. So how do we handle, now key word in this is uncontested elections. So there aren't, maybe in some offices there aren't names. So what do you do if there is no name or the person passes away? You count them all. Now, if you, generally what we do, if somebody's making a joke and puts Scooby-Doo or Mickey Mouse, I don't write Mickey Mouse on the tally sheet and give Mickey Mouse 4 votes. You can. However, as clerks, when we go to bring our election results into Paul, he just puts them in a scatter category, which is probably why Mickey Mouse is not on our county board right now, because his votes aren't being counted. So if it's uncontested, then yes, you count all write-ins. What other things from group 3?
So uncontested means there's no name.
No one. Yep.
If there's one person's name on there.
Yep. There's one person and 1 vote's allowed. Then you count that and then you ask, is there a registered write-in? Yes or no? How many seats are there? Is it, say, vote for 2 and there's just 1 on there? Then what? Then you would count them. Yep. Now, Paul told me at the break that it's possible in this next year that there might be some county board positions that are changing. There's a possibility some might be open, so keep that in mind. But again, we're going to try to make some more clear communications to you all to say, hey, when it's this office, this is how you deal with write-ins, okay? Because it's confusing. And I don't expect, and how often do we do this? That's what's hard about this, right? We don't do this every day. It was one thing by November last year. I felt like I got things down pat. But, we haven't had, elections since, some, I guess in Strum it's different. You just had one 2 weeks ago. But, it's hard. When we don't do this often, this is not our full-time job, it is hard to remember. So we'll try to communicate that a little bit better. Anything else from number 3 that anyone wants to share from those groups?
What if there is only one, vote for 1, there's a name on the ballot, but there's a write-in that wins the election.
So, also keep in mind that winning the election, most of the time, unless you're talking about your town board, there's also other municipalities factored in. So really, it's one thing for us to tally the votes and bring those results to Paul, but that is really a determination that's made by Paul's office in the end.
Sure, I realize that, but I'm just saying as far as do the votes count?
It depends on the office. So is there someone on the ballot? Can they be can write-ins be counted? Are they registered? How many seats? So it is confusing because it is really based on that particular office.
You said before, count them whether they're registered or not. Count
No.
all of them?
No, it depends. Hold on, can I answer this question first? Unless it's someone. Okay. So, it depends on the office. So, for offices like the governor or the president or assembly, for example, there's usually a person on the ballot, right? So you'd say, you know, first of all, is there somebody on the ballot for that office? Is it uncontested? Most of the time, no. There's usually someone on there, right? So then, can you count write-ins for that office? A lot of times, you count registered write-ins only. And Paul communicates that to us clerks. So I know that being inspectors, maybe it's kind of hard because you don't necessarily get that communication. But when we have things like a town board seat or a county board, well, I guess county board you just vote for one. But let's talk about times where you would have more than, you could vote for more than two. A lot of times there's maybe just two on there, right? And then a write-in option. So that would be probably one of the more relevant examples for us of when that would happen. Where would you count a write-in? Is the write-in registered? So are there enough seats? How many votes is that elector entitled to? So it really gets more into when you've got maybe the dual seats. Does anyone have, I'm trying to think of a time where I've had to deal with this and I can't think of one. Yeah. Oh, yep.
Twice we've only had two candidates running. And I believe, I can't remember now, the WEC told me to include as many write-in options.
Yep.
So anyone that voted for the two on the ballot and wrote in a write-in, that I counted all the write-in votes.
Okay. Yeah, village board.
Election, someone was written in, nobody had registered.
Yeah.
And nobody ever has registered for a village seat.
Wow. Where is this? Those with political aspirations need to move to that municipality. Yeah. I don't know if this... The person got on the village board with 6 votes. In Clark County, we had a couple county board positions that were filled that way, where it was a write-in.
Even if they're not registered?
Well, yeah, explain that.
Yeah, so you know, and I mean, I don't vote in Clark County because that would be illegal, right? But the clerk there told me that had happened, but I'm thinking no one was on the ballot at all. But I'm not sure. So, and I know Neillsville City Council that was filled. A write-in took a spot on the city council, but that was uncontested
So what
too.
you're saying is if they're write-ins and there's nobody else on the ballot, then they don't have to be registered?
Nope. You count, if there's nobody on that seat, you count them.
Then you can count them.
Yep.
But now if
there is somebody on there,
and there's somebody that's not registered, you can't count that one.
if there are, if the position allows it.
Right. With a number of seats.
Yep, so it does depend, you know, how many can all be counted, whether or not, you know, is the write-in registered, are there enough seats, and then keep in mind voter intent too. So, now I know they said that this is in your election manual, which you should all have. It does outline it a little bit better in there, but I still think there's probably some more room for interpretation, so hopefully we'll highlight that.
Okay, so just to clarify, she had two candidates for a 3-person position.
Yep.
The write-ins were not registered. So do you count any write-ins that are put on that ballot?
Did they need to be registered? You didn't have anyone.
I didn't have anyone register for that 3rd seat.
Yeah.
And we counted all the applicants.
Counted all of them.
There
So
weren't-
that's okay.
or all
Because
the
there's-
write-ins, all the write-ins.
Yep.
There weren't many write-ins.
Because there weren't enough to fill the seats.
So there's not enough.
Everyone, almost everyone
Yes.
that voted for the two candidates that were on the
Okay.
ballot. And a handful of people wrote someone in, and we counted the
Question.
ones that were.
If I don't vote for those two that
Yep.
is on the ballot, I can write in and my vote will get counted, won't it?
If there are more seats, then yes.
But then if there's 3 seats available and only 2 names on there, isn't one of those seats uncontested?
What do you mean?
Okay, there's 3 seats open.
Yep.
Only 2 people are on the ballot.
Mhm.
Then isn't that 3rd seat uncontested?
Yeah, if you have your ballot set up that way. You have it all under one.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
vote for 3.
Mhm.
It lists, and it lists.
See, ours, for our, I kind of want to move on and not talk about, like individual things. I'd rather give like comprehensive kind of rules. But our town is set up so it's first supervisor, second supervisor. So it's not just that they're all piled into one. So I don't have a lot of experience counting those that way, but yeah, that would be my understanding. Yeah, I think you did. Yeah, no, I think that's correct. Is it okay if we come back to write-ins?
No,
Okay.
because this is coming where you have, the exception is where it, like the 3 and only 2 are filled. So they're kind of like grandfathered in. I want to know about you've got the 2 positions and you've got them clearly filled out. And then you have a write-in that's not registered.
Yep.
Who's counted?
Who's counted?
But they're not registered.
If you don't,
Might not matter.
some cases, you don't have to be a registered write-in. Certain races.
Yep. It depends on the office.
Depends on the race that's on the ballot.
Yep.
If you're running for governor, you have to be a registered write-in.
Yep.
If it's for a village trustee, you don't have to be a registered write-in.
Yep.
What about the school board?
School board does not need to be a registered
No.
write-in.
We got 4 school boards.
Yep. School boards, town boards. Yeah.
Depends on what race you're talking about.
Yep. Depends on the office.
Okay.
All right. I promise to stay after, and we can talk more about write-ins, but for those of you who kind of passed the write-in stuff, we're going to move on, okay? So number 4, the polls will close after a long day. We've got an extra ballot. What steps should we take? Those of you who had number 4s. This row? Back there.
First, I would check the poll list to make sure that the numbering is the same.
Yep. Verify your poll list back and forth.
Check to basic addition.
Yep. Count. I would count, recount. Yep.
Check your statement for anything that happened during the
Yep. Perfect, which is why you should write things down on the inspector statement.
Make sure that the people that you have working and have a voter number, that they are registered.
And in the end, you find things still to be the same. That's when you pull it.
Yep. If when it's all said and done, you still have an extra, then you pull one. But check and recheck.
Is that saved? Like put into another envelope and save that?
I think, is there an envelope for that? It's been a while since, yeah. The spoiled ones. Yeah. And then one thing too is I would look on the back of the paper ones to see that they were initialed. And if you have one that wasn't initialed, you could maybe pull that one. So contingency plans are something that I covered for the first time last year. And when I was going over the evaluations, it kind of stood out that people were not maybe understanding the contingency plans as well as some of the other information. So I thought, well, it was the first time. We'll review it again. So I pared down the information a little bit, and we'll just review some of these contingency plans. So each municipality should have an alternate polling place designated and filed with Paul. So, with us, it's at the city. of Independence. Good idea to print signage that says that before you're in an emergency that would necessitate a polling place location, right? Because if you need to move polling places, there's probably something going on where hard to print signage, or I guess handwrite it. Now, keep in mind, I'm sorry, am I losing you? The less you talk, the quicker we can get done, okay? And I'm trying to stay on task. Okay. Keep in mind, voting equipment has a backup battery. So in the case of an emergency, the voting equipment can still continue to work even if there's, a power failure or you need to change venues. Take all threats of violence seriously, especially in the day and age that we live in. In the event of a worldwide terrorism event, this is a contingency plan adopted by the Taylor County Clerk that used state and federal resources. But what I find a little disheartening is, even though this last paragraph, even though it could dramatically affect each voter on a personal level, we might just continue on with the election. So, yikes. So stay the course until the county clerk notifies emergency management or state and local officials have declared otherwise. In case of a fire, remember in this order, people, cast ballots, uncast ballots, okay? So make sure everybody is safe, first of all. In the event of a fire or a fire alarm, get everybody to safety. Then where are the cast ballots? Because I'll tell you something, those paper ballots, those are just copies. Paul just copies them, or we just copy them on a photocopier. The blank ballots, we can make more. Cast ballots, important. Blank ones, not quite as important, although you probably want to keep them so they don't get into the wrong hands. If there's an alarm, the unvoted ballots and the touch screen or the voting devices would be taken into custody of the election inspectors. And then the ballot box, we would want to, try to grab that after the people are safe. And then if it's just an alarm and we can go back in, then we'll resume as normal. Now you can set up in a corner of the parking lot. Those machines have backup. A garage or another, we have a really gross garbage shed. I'm not sure we'd use that. It doesn't have power, but maybe depending on the weather, we'd probably just go to the nice city of Independence actually. But so in the event, you could set up in the corner and wait until you're going to move, or you get the all clear. In case of electrical outage, good to have flashlights, although at our polling location it wouldn't matter with the lights. People could still reasonably see. It just depends on your location. You may need to change venue if the power's out for a while. Again, the machines can operate for a few hours without being plugged in. Natural disaster, we will be having elections in August and in April. So the threat of, flooding or a tornado, I guess, is there. I don't think blizzards count especially here. So if it's necessary to evacuate, follow the instructions of the clerk and of the chief election inspector. Again, try to secure the cast ballots and then resume business as usual if possible. If it's a storm, if it's flooding, change of venue. So to do a change of venue, there should be an alternative polling place on file with Paul. It's a good thing for clerks to communicate to workers what that is. I think that's why you were chatting before. And then the municipal clerk will call Paul and notify him of the situation. Hey, we need a change of venue due to a fire or power outage or whatever. And then the inspectors are going to help the clerk pack up the equipment and we're going to move. You can call the local radio station to inform voters, put signage on the door. We've moved to, you know, the city hall or this town hall or the school or whatever. I'm sorry this is so small, but keep in mind, this requires a police escort. So if you're within a municipality that has a police officer on staff, that would be the person to call. Those of us in towns, sheriff's department. So we need to do a police escort to be moving ballots from one location to another. So moving them from the town hall into the parking lot and resuming voting, that's fine. If we're going to pick them up and move them down the road, then we need a police escort. So we call them. All the unvoted ballots, so the blank ones, will be in the presence of the chief election inspector and one other person, just to ensure that, I don't know, if you can't trust your chief inspector, I don't know what you're doing, but just to ensure that those ballots are not being filled out and cast or whatever. The police officer has to remain in view of the ballot box as you're switching locations. And then once you get to the new location, the inspectors and the municipal clerk will help, will set up, you know, the touch screens. And a noted on the inspector statement, we moved to a different place. It's a pretty big deal. And again, notify Paul. Yes?
I'm just being negative Nelly here probably, but if there's a natural disaster going on or something, that way it's in our municipality are probably going to be busy with that.
This is if you need a change of venue.
Right. So say we have a fire, our chief of police are there helping control traffic at our location. How can we enforce to them that they need to be doing this?
If you're going to move the ballots, you need a police escort.
Okay.
So, I mean,
I'm sorry, I got it. I'm attending.
then I would not move until you have one. Yeah, I mean, a sheriff, I mean, it doesn't, you should call your municipal police officer to do it, but if that person's busy, then I would hope another law enforcement professional could step in and help. Okay, I'm almost done. Recount. I joked last year. If we talk about recounts, it won't happen. And then it happened. And from that experience, we know that recounts begin no earlier than 9 a.m. on the day following the candidates. In December, it took recounts for over a couple days, all day long. The county board of canvassers assists with that, so Paul asks some of us municipal clerks and others to help. We recounted them by hand. And anyone can attend the recount. The media popped in and out of that, and other people too. Now, things that we learned from that are good reminders today. Absentee ballots need to be witnessed and signed, and there needs to be an address on there. There were a lot of times that we didn't. No one has M100 machines in this county, right? We had an issue in another county, the ovals not being filled in, which you can imagine causes some problems. A couple times we had absentee voters who voted in person, which is why I made it one of those training scenarios. Issuing provisional ballots when someone doesn't have a voter ID. A couple times people got turned away that shouldn't have been. Include the spools, there is where I have it. Include the spools with the cast votes in the ballot bag because it makes it easier to count them when we're hand counting them. I saw many, many times over being off on voter numbers. So let's talk about that, Nick. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Best practices, you know, what are you using, like tips like that, writing an absentee, just so you're looking at it. You know, compare poll lists throughout the day, definitely at shift changes. You know, 10 and 2 and 5 are good times too. A couple people I know have, well, Paul gives us numbers, stickers, and that helps a lot. There's less room for error with that. I know another way to cross-check that is if you have like a piece of paper or a legal pad and you write numbers, you know, 1 through however many you think you're going to have that day, And then as people come in, you cross that number off. That helps.
Melissa,
Yeah.
with the numbers, we use the stickers.
Yep.
And we get 2 books sitting here, and first person comes in, 1, 1.
Mhm.
After they leave, we make sure it's 1.
Yep.
Second one, 2, 2, and we're never
So
off.
constantly checking.
We do after every person.
Yep,
walks
after
through.
every person. Okay.
And we're never off.
Yeah. Anybody else have a tip like that on how to keep voters straight?
We had with Aliva, that
Mhm.
has that extra sheet that's
Yep.
numbered, and they write their names in on that.
Yep. Writing the names down. Yep. You know, I'll tell you, a lot of times when people get off on the voter numbers is when one of the workers votes. Yeah. Yeah. Another thing too, you know, filling out that inspector statement helps provide a backup. And then when counting ballots, you don't want one person counting them up and saying, okay, 10 for Trump, 10 for Clinton, 2 for Stein. You want to call them out. Trump, Clinton, Stein, Trump, Clinton. Less room for error. It's also better accountability. Yeah.
I think our crew that does the counting, they also all are supposed to call out when they get to a 5.
Oh, yep. And then you do the hatch. Mm-hmm.
We did that at the recount.
Yep.
Every time we got to that 5, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Typical, and they don't say 5, they say tally.
Tally. Mhm.
Tally.
Yep. That keeps you on point too. Any other tips? Okay, then that is all I have for you today. Please be sure to fill out this yellow survey because this is what we use to come up with training in the future. And if you want to just hand it to Sam in the back by the camera when you leave, that would be great.